Good morning. It's been a little while. I wanted to comment on a couple of current events. Those being the recent comments of Donald Trump regarding the brutal and horrific death of Rob Reiner and his wife. And also the massacre at Bondi Beach in Australia. We'll start with the ridiculous first, I guess. Obviously, very horrific and quite heartbreaking death of Rob Reiner and his wife. Obviously, this is a complex and a lot of these situations are often very, very fraught. Dealing with the drug addiction or the general addiction of their son for obviously many years. And it appears that Rob has, tried on many occasions to figure out what do you do about this. And having dealt with some family tragedies in this regard, both on my side of the family with my father being diagnosed bipolar, in his, sort of late middle age or middle age, I guess. And, the estrangement that caused between he and I for the 13 years prior to his untimely death. And then also my wife and her family having issues with drug addiction and an overdose related to that, right? It's all, people had tried to intervene. These things are very difficult. The person that had passed away due to an overdose, they were a good person. They were a really good person. They were struggling, with you call them demons, whatever you want to call them. These addictions are very, very difficult to deal with. And the reason I feel compelled to comment on the idiot comments of Donald Trump is because I have defended him in the past in various videos. Now, having said that, I've never really defended him directly. I've always been defending truth, usually. I mostly have pointed out that I've never really liked him. And that, but I mean, that doesn't mean anything, right? But that my primary criticism of him has been his rampant deficit spending. I mean, I'm a firm believer that deficit spending, especially to the degree that nations do it nowadays, is wholly immoral. It's child abuse. It's a form of fraud, right? Because you are spending money on other people's behalf, often. Nowadays, it's people that are not of the age of consent, arguably that haven't even been born yet in some cases, right? I mean, this is when your borrowing reaches that level of your GDP, this becomes inevitable at some point. So that's one of my major criticisms of him. When I have defended him, it's been about statements of fact, that people will make, that he said that, the neo-Nazis were very fine people and things like that. That's usually what I've defended when I have defended him. But I do think that sort of necessitates that, that I level a criticism once in a while, I suppose, when I see it. And this is so blatant. I mean, what a fucking stupid thing to say. His whole Truth Social post, he could have been magnanimous too. That's the beauty of it. I watched a Gad Sad video the other day and he said, he had a real opportunity to come off as magnanimous here and just say, what a tragedy. I feel so terrible. It's a dark day for America, something, whatever. And that, you can make some comment potentially maybe about the difficulties of mental illness and addiction and things like that. Had the opportunity to do that, chose to make it all about himself. And, I think we all know like elderly gentlemen who seem to become a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more blinded in their vision about things, about the world, about their relationships with other people, and they become a little belligerent and difficult to deal with. And I get a lot of hints of that in this Truth Social post that Donald Trump stupidly put up, where he, first of all, he made it all about him, as though Rob Reiner had driven someone to murder him based solely on his Trump derangement syndrome, which is ludicrous. Even if the arguments that they had to do with Trump and politics. I'm sorry, but that's not why you stab your parents to death, or your father and your, I think, stepmother. I'm not sure about that exactly. Like, there's more to that, right? There's more to that. And then to take the moment, for some self-aggrandizement, talking about, how great the country is, essentially because of him and his administration, which, obviously all of that is arguable. Like, so, some people are very good at self-promotion. Donald Trump takes it to a whole nother level. And, oftentimes the self-promotion actually falls on deaf ears because you're just so blatant and so biased, so obviously biased about it. You're so obviously biased that it wouldn't matter what was happening. You would still self-promote anyway, even if you were, by all metrics, if all metrics were at a deficit, you would still take the opportunity to self-promote. It's just fucking ridiculous. Especially as someone who suffers from kind of the opposite syndrome, right? Like, when something happens, I'm first to criticize myself. I'm first past the post, to criticize myself. And I'm always hard on myself. I'm always not giving myself the credit I probably deserve. My wife, my daughter, friends are pointing this out to me all the time. And so it's really hard for me to understand how someone can self-promote to that degree. It's that's probably a mark of narcissism, obviously. Anyway, I just wanted to comment on that. It's like the obvious point is obvious, but I really felt like, yeah, I probably should, considering that I have defended the man in the past, even though it's never been necessarily a personal defense. It's more a defense of what actually has taken place, of lies, things like that. The thing I wanted to comment about on the Bondi Beach massacre, where these father and son, a team, I guess you could call it, went and shot up this, as far as I understand, like a Hanukkah celebration. This constant celebration of diversity and defense of it, even when it shows itself to be problematic. This kind of diversity doesn't work, and I don't think it maybe ever will. I don't know. It really depends on what happens with humanity over time. But it's certainly not working now. And it's interesting because I was watching or reviewing a video of my own that I had made. It was a response to Overnator that I had made a long time ago, like in 2024, so not that long, but where I was discussing different forms of government and democracy, and I was sort of defending my point that democracy is immoral. And I was saying in the video, I just watched it, I was saying in the video that, in some ways these are governments of antiquity, in that, or even pre-antiquity, in that this is how governments would have sort of originally formed, perhaps, back when the world was a much smaller place. Obviously not, the globe wasn't smaller, but societies were smaller. There was fewer people, and people were more spread out. And so you had these disparate tribes of people that self-governed, right? And, likely they might have voted or had some way of choosing a leader if they felt like, being more democratic. And because the groups were more homogenous, there's more like-minded people within these disparate groups, I think it probably worked better because they all had the same general ideas about things, how things should be done, and they just needed some people to carry those things out. And as the world changed, as these groups grew and the borders grew closer together, you started to have territorial disputes, you started to have cultural clashes as these disparate tribes started to interface with other ideas that they didn't necessarily support. And slowly over time, we reach, the position that we're in now, where there are people who arguably cannot coexist, right? The Jewish people of Bondi Beach area and or anywhere, and sort of radical Islamists. Explain to me how they're going to coexist. You explain it to me. And yet, a couple of criticisms I would have about the whole Bondi Beach thing. you've got you got a lot of people who are criticizing based on a lot of the cell phone videos that have surfaced from that day. You've got a lot of people who are very critical of the police response because these guys were able to just keep shooting for, over 30 minutes, as far as I understand it. This is all provisional knowledge for me at the moment. So if there's any corrections that need to be made, feel free to let me know in the comments below. I'll make a follow-up video if necessary and correct anything because I think it's obviously very important to be pretty accurate. But as far as I understand it, they were able to, carry on this massacre for over 30 minutes. And generally speaking, in a city, a police response of over 5 minutes is not considered to be all that good. So exactly what happened there, and yet you've got the Prime Minister of the country praising the police for having raided the father's home after the fact to gather information. And, it's part of a normal investigation. And it's like you're praising him for the most routine part of what's happening there. You're just desperate to praise somebody, I guess. I don't know. I don't understand. I don't understand that. You're also a representative, in theory, the representative of the people there. And I think that deserves criticism, right? The fact that this guy, he chose to heap praise on the police for doing a routine investigatory procedure and doesn't comment at all. And, I'm not saying he necessarily needed to be critical of them for their slow response, because he may or may not know about that at that moment. And he may want to allow an opportunity for some of the details to come out and respond to those criticisms later. But I don't get that. But more importantly, you've got a female politician who has come out and started ranting about diversity and how, it's important for us to be kind to each other and all of this. And it's like, you're talking to the wrong people. Like, she's saying it like, we have work to do, essentially, right? We need to treat each other with kindness, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, the obvious point is that the vast majority of people are already fucking doing that. We're already doing that. And it's people like her who were promoting and pushing these whole ideas of diversity in the first place. You've got, groups of people who have been immigrated into these areas who don't agree with the politics of the people who live there, who don't agree with the religion of the people who live there. And as a government, I think it's obviously very, very irresponsible. Let's say both groups of people, the Jewish people and the Islamists are both immigrated to the country. It's pretty irresponsible for governments to do that, to allow that en masse without any thought for the conflicts that are going to potentially arise from that. And then she says, fucking people. Then she says, I think that given the chance, most people will, this is not a direct quote, but given the chance, most people will, treat each other with kindness or something like that. Fuck, lady. They were given the chance. This is what they did with it. Like, you're literally dealing with the aftermath of what happened when people were given the chance, that's an air quote, people were given the chance to treat each other with kindness, and they chose to take, a half a dozen firearms to a beach and just start shooting people. At some point, you're going to, this is one of my more recent philosophies. It's very rough around the edges, but at some point, you're going to have to fucking deal with that, right? That's my new philosophy, is at some point, you really need to contend with X, whatever X is. And this is definitely X. Right? At some point, you're going to have to deal with that no, left to their own devices, given half a chance, there are people who won't do that, who won't treat each other with kindness, who won't live and let live. And at some point, you're going to be forced to deal with it if you don't deal with it now. And to try to trot out diversity as the answer to a situation that was created by diversity, the problems that diversity can bring, is obviously criminally irresponsible, and obviously, it shows that she's really not qualified to be in the position that she's in, managing, as a politician. Essentially, you're managing the affairs of the governed. She's unqualified for that if she can't see some of these basic things. And a lot of them can't, and some of them, like our own previous Prime Minister here, Justin Trudeau, I think to some degree, they know better a little bit. And some of them are clueless. Now, don't get me wrong, Trudeau is mostly clueless. He's one of the most clueless people I've ever witnessed, but I'm not sure that he's totally clueless about the actual problems of diversity. I mean, we've had to deal with things like honor killings and things like that in Canada, and similar, religious type disputes and things like that. I'm not sure that I would give him the total out that he just doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. I think there's some part of him that knows. This woman doesn't appear to know. And it's one of the most ridiculous and reckless things I've seen, because there are a lot of people who nod and follow along because they believe they're good people. Generally speaking, tend to be good liberals, right? Who believe in this diversity is our strength mantra. And I think a lot of it is that they feel like it makes them a good person to believe. You see this all the time. Young women, young liberal, generally women, who go off to, some Middle Eastern country to prove to everyone that human beings are all kind and peaceful, and they get raped and dismembered. I mean, it's happened a few times, right? And I think, again, it's because they believe that it makes them good people. But I'm not sure it makes you a good people if your diverse policies end up getting a bunch of people shot to death on a beach, and of course destroys the feeling of security and safety that everyone else has. I mean, that's the thing. The tragedy doesn't stop at the people who ended up dead or in the hospital or their families. It's everyone in the country, certainly everyone in the city, and I would argue probably everyone worldwide ultimately, because it just adds to the sense that we all have that things are not good, that things are not right, and that you're not safe anywhere. Again, no one's safe apparently. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching.